everyone, and welcome to the .NET Core Podcast, an award-winning podcast where we reach into the core of the .NET technology stack and, with the help of the .NET community, present you with the information that you need in order to grok the many moving parts of one of the biggest cross-platform multi-application frameworks on the planet. I am your host, Jamie Gaprogaman Taylor. In this episode, I talked with Dan Walmsley about AvaloniaUI, a cross-platform desktop UI framework for all of the .NETs, which has been in development since 2014 and has the largest support for operating system and desktop environments of all of the desktop UI frameworks for .NET. We chose about why you might want to choose it over the alternatives such as .NET MAUI and what potential roadblocks it has faced that the other cross-platform desktop UI frameworks are yet to face. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let this show begin. Hello, Dan. My goodness, it's great to be connected with you. We're going to talk about yourself and mostly about Avalonia UI and cross-platform .NET stuff in a moment. But first of all, I'd like to welcome you onto the show. Thank you ever so much for being here.
Hi, Jamie. Thanks for having me on the show. It's great to be here.
Not a problem. So for just peeking behind the curtains a little bit of insider baseball talk. This is an episode that's taken a little bit of time to get around to, but that's because you're a very busy chap. So that is totally understandable. So I think when we first started talking, I'd heard of Avalonia UI, but I hadn't at that point heard of any applications that use it. But now there's a whole bunch of people signed on and are actually using it in their day-to-day application stuff. So I guess just to give the listeners a bit of a teaser there, that we'll be talking about a couple of cross-platform modern .NET apps that use Avalonia and how you can maybe do that. But I guess before we can even start on that, I was wondering, would you mind introducing yourself to the listeners, give them a little bit of a flavor of who Dan is and that kind of stuff?
Sure, of course. Yeah, so I'm Dan Walmsley, and I've actually been involved in Avalonia from the very beginning. That's probably coming up to almost 8 years now. My background is I actually started off as an electronic engineer, and working with electronics, the companies I work for, they always needed software, embedded software, software tools on the UI. So I just naturally gravitated towards programming and found out that I was actually quite good at it and really, really liked it. And I just sort of migrated into that space. After a while, I discovered technologies like WPF and started I really enjoyed like the patterns that were used there and developing UIs. And that was obviously tied to Windows. And eventually I kind of had like my own projects that I was building on this sort of new WPF technology. And I really wanted it to run on Linux as well. Started looking on GitHub to see if there was like, and Stack Overflow and there was no real solution. But I discovered this one guy, Stephen Kirk, had kind of done a very small re-engineering of WPF, and I think it had like a button. You could get a button on the screen and it would run on all 3 platforms. And then I just sort of like, hey, this is really great, and started contributing to that. And at that time, I was still working in the embedded like electronic software space. And I actually started using Avalonia to build like a cross-platform C++ embedded software IDE, which kind of drove the early development forward, because there's obviously in those early stages, there's going to be a lot of problems or things that are missing. And then eventually I was just like, I really like doing this UI stuff, working on Avalonia, and that's pretty much all I do now. Yeah.
I like that. There's a lot to be said about dog fooding your own stuff, right?
Yeah.
And when you are the user, you discover all of these things that you don't hear about until a in quotes real user starts using it, right? And I think that's quite kind of important, right?
It's invaluable to if you're developing a framework or a tool and you're not using it yourself, don't be surprised to find that users have problems that you haven't even imagined were going to be there. And yeah, from the whole time that I've been working on Avalonia, including now, I make sure that I'm active in actual projects that are using Avalonia. So I work on both sides, and that way you immediately see if there are issues. And the advantage is, you can just dive in there, as anyone can because it's open source. You can just dive in there and fix it yourself. Or there's a huge community of experts that if it's something that's not your expertise, there's people you can rely on, talk to, and they'll tell you how you can fix it. And that's the way that I've worked with Avalonia now, well, the whole time.
That's cool. I like that. And like you say, dog fooding, using your own software to achieve some goal is the best way, I think, as we both said, to learn about the software, right? To learn about the domain. I remember working on some invoicing software for a company I used to work for, and they were selling it to their clients, sort of thing. And the problem was that we were under the impression that it would only ever be used for GBP payments. So, payments in British pounds. And then we found 6 months after we'd released it, someone had whiteboxed it and sold it to a company in Europe, and then they'd sold it to a company in Saudi Arabia. And I don't know whether you've had much experience of all of the different currencies, but they're not all base 100, right? So like in GBP, we have 100 pence makes a pound. In euros, you have 100 cents makes a euro. In US dollars, 100 cents makes a dollar. But there are some currencies like Japanese yen that don't have that base value. They just have the equivalent of €1, right? They don't have 100th of a euro or 100th of a dollar in the way that we do in Europe and the US and the UK. And so it meant that we had to go and re-architect the entire application to use like a base value and then a modifier. So it would be, instead of it being 199 in euros, it would be 199 and then the base unit cents, and then a multiplier to work it out in like that sort of upper level unit. And if we hadn't have had that knowledge, if we'd have had that knowledge rather, that the user would have been from different countries, we could have built in tests and used it ourselves to sort of fake bill companies in different regions. But we didn't know that, right? Because we weren't dog fooding it.
Yeah, one of the core contributors that we have, Benedict, he's had a PR that has completed birthdays, and it's for text layout, right to left text support. So basically it can support any language in the world, and the complexities of rendering that and dealing with the different ways that different languages is kind of a similar problem. And that's why that PR has completed birthdays. We actually merged yesterday, I think. Wow. So we were all celebrating that. But
excellent. So because of the Timecast Pod Machine wibbly wobbliness, that's multiple months ago now when people are listening. But yeah, still, congratulations on getting that sorted. My goodness.
And they've had a lot of people from different countries that speak different languages, Kay, and giving us input on what works for them, what doesn't, and it's just you can't. No one person can experience or have that experience. The world's too big.
Absolutely. So that's why dog fooding and things like diversity and inclusion and things like that are all so vitally important, because then you get these points of view, like you say, these folks who are like, hey, we're from a right to left rather than left to right culture. And so, there's a problem with that. Or, Maybe, there's this edge case with this particular Unicode character, or maybe you're not even using Unicode. I don't know. I've not looked into the code, right? And so you get all of these complexities that you wouldn't have realized had you only lived in your little bubble and created the framework, right? And that's what I think is really great about sort of the open source movement recently, is just like everyone can get involved and everyone can share their experience, right?
Yeah, definitely. In Avalonia, we've actually got Russian language chat group, and it's huge. It's like as big as the English speaking group. And obviously, when I look in there, I can't actually understand anything that's going on. But then they'll come and they'll contribute pull requests in English, and it's like related to internationalization for Russian and similar stuff. And it's having people from all over the world it's amazing.
That's awesome. Okay. So we talked a little bit about Avalonia and how it's sort of evolved over the last number of years. We haven't really talked about what Avalonia UI actually is. I'd be interested to, if you know it, the story of the name, but also like, what is it that I can do with Avalonia UI? So my question, I guess, is where does the name come from? If you know that story, and what is it that Avalonia UI lets me do?
Yeah, so I'll just quickly tell you what Avalonia is, and then I'll tell you the story about the name. It's quite interesting. So Avalonia is a .NET UI framework. It's cross-platform, and our kind of motto is your application everywhere. The name it comes from WPF, Windows Presentation Framework. In the early days, before that was actually launched, Microsoft's code name for WPF was Avalon, Project Avalon. And our name Avalonia is kind of a nod to that, because we see our roots come from WPF. We're kind of like, if WPF evolved and it was written now, many years later, with the latest versions of C# and all the new .NET cross-platform technology, what might WPF look like? So that's why it's Avalonia. It seems a bit weird at first, but when you hear the story, you can see why where the name comes from.
Excellent. Okay, so since it's based on WPF, is it XAML? Is it C#? Is it some other thing? What's the code, I guess, that it sits in? How do I make a thing?
Okay, so Avalonia is all those things. WPF was very focused on XAML. A lot of people are kind of allergic to XAMLs. I mean, my first experience with XAML was a bit like that. Wow, very verbose and kind of prefer code. Eventually it grew on me, actually. But in the very early stages of Avalonia, we actually just didn't have XAML. And we supported writing a UI with code. We now have community projects that allow and enable declarative C# to declare your UI. And many people prefer to go down this route. But we actually also do have excellent support for XAML. We've actually written our own XAML compiler. People inside Microsoft have actually tried it out and tried to use it to optimize some of their XAML compilers and taken ideas from it. So it's really up to you what you prefer. If you want to stay with code or you like XAML, then go for it. And another community project that has spun off is Avalonia.funkui, which is an F# flavor of Avalonia. So you've got all the F# declarative, functional ways of dealing with UI, and I think it's MVP pattern that's very popular now. So yeah, Avalonia is for everyone.
Ace. There was something that you said there about you have this your own custom compiler for XAML stuff, and how some of the folks at Microsoft have taken a look and have maybe borrowed some ideas. I love that, because that you see, that's what I love about cross-platform open source stuff. Especially if it's open source, you can actually take a look and go, "That's a really neat idea. I'll have to maybe look into re-implementing or borrowing or whatever, forking that and doing something with it." And then all of my customers, all of my clients, all of my users, whatever noun you choose to use, then get the benefit of the sharing of that knowledge, right? There's an earlier episode where we talked with one of the folks behind Ryujin-X. Now, Ryujin-X is a Nintendo Switch emulator. And they said that one of the things that they loved doing was reporting back to Microsoft, hey, in these particular circumstances, we'd love to be able to declare that we don't want the compiler stepping in and doing some pre-optimizations because we've already optimized. And guess what? That's now in. I mean, this was years ago, right? But that's in the .NET compiler now. So you can actually apply these these attributes and say, don't bother jitting this. Don't bother optimizing this because I've already done the hard work for you, and you'll waste time doing stuff. So like on entry into a method, one of the things that the .NET compiler can do, if you let it, is it zeroes out any new variables you create. So if you do var x equals default, it will create that gap of like default int or whatever. It'll create that bucket of memory for you and then zero it out. But if you don't care about the zeroed out value and you're immediately going to assign a value to it that's from somewhere else, that's a wasted couple of cycles. And in things like video games, those couple of cycles are the make or break between 60 frames a second and 55 or 40 frames a second, right? But the great thing about that is, and the reason I bring that up is because then that's something everyone benefits from. And from what you were saying there, if people at Microsoft have taken this XAML compiler that you've all worked on and implemented some of those features to make their XAML compilers better, well, guess what? Your WPF applications have just benefited from this free open source thing that has got nothing to do with actually the code and the framework that you're using. But these ideas have sort of cross-pollinated, and I absolutely love that.
Yeah, in the end, I'm not sure they actually used our compiler directly, but they definitely played around with it. So probably some of our ideas may have influenced them. But yeah, Avalonia, we try to build everything in a modular way. So the XAML compiler isn't in the main repo; it's separate. So if you need that, anybody can use it. And we're really happy for anybody in the same space or anybody in the .NET to reuse our code however they want. There's people that use parts of our code for things that we couldn't even think of, So yeah, it's really great.
Like I say, that to me is what open source development is about someone seeing these lumps of code, these individual modules of code, these individual sort of child repos, I guess, and going, wouldn't it be great if I could take that and actually apply it to this other problem that I've got, right? You mentioned earlier on that you were having some problems with some WPF stuff right at the beginning before you even sort of jumped on the Avalonia UI idea. And you were like, there must be a way to solve this. Well, guess what? You've done back then what people will be doing now, looking for this solution, right?
Yeah, and that's the great thing about like the open source world and things like GitHub is, that there could be 3 or 4 people in the world having the same problem that you're having right now, or the same idea. But now with GitHub and social media where there's developers, so it's easier to find those people. You can get those few people together that may never have found each other before. They might have done 5 of their own projects, but having those 5 people come together and making one better project is incredible.
Absolutely. And not just that, it's within 3 or 4 hops, right? Whereas previously it may have been possible to bring those people together, but you would have to know email addresses, phone numbers, whatever. But right now, if everyone's on Twitter, you just put out a call on Twitter, hey, is everyone having problems with this? Then immediately the people who reply, you have a way of contacting them, right? And you've already got a little group straight away. So it's like, it's not just that you can, it's that you can with very few steps involved. And that, I think, is amazing. Excellent. Okay. So you've got this UI framework, right? And you've mentioned that it runs with .NET several times. And the problem that I have, and I feel like it's more of a marketing problem from Microsoft's point of view. And I say this, right? We're recording this during the 20th anniversary of .NET, and it'll be going out a little while later. But the problem that I found with a lot of people with .NET is they're like, okay, what does .NET actually mean, right? Because there's .NET Framework with a capital F, there's .NET Core, there's .NET 5, 6, and, this year 7, next year 8. So when you say that it is a .NET UI framework, is that .NET Framework capital F? Is that modern .NET? So that's .NET Core 5, 6 plus. Is it both? Is it neither? Like, if I'm building an app, do I need to target a specific, I think they call them platform monikers? Like, how can I use Avalonia UI in my app? Do I need to rewrite it, is what I'm saying?
So if you're starting a brand new application, definitely go for .NET 6 or whatever the latest .NET core version is. We've built Avalonia to run on all the .NETs, the traditional .NET Framework, .NET Core. We support running under Mono, all the ones that I know about. Maybe there's some other ones that I've not heard about. We support running those. Like the Avalonia library targets .NET Standard. So anything that you can reference .NET Standard, you can run.
Excellent. Because that's so this isn't a problem for you and I to solve, right? But my biggest worry when I talk about .NET Framework is I don't want to say legacy.NET, but that's almost kind of what it's become, right? I don't want to call it that because I don't want people to come to this and go, well, Jamie, this weirdo in the UK, says that it's legacy, right? And so now I have to go, but that's not what I'm going for, right? It is not legacy. It's just, that's why I say .NET Framework with a capital F and modern.NET, right? Because it feels like there's a bit of a separation there on what it can do. But I like the idea that you've targeted .NET Standard. So then essentially you've got the widest possible surface area for adoption. I really like that.
Yeah, so, Avalonia is really suited to line of business applications. There's a lot of companies that have like internal tools just for managing various things that they need. And many of those are either WinForms or WPF. And if you've got those and it's based on WPF, your application is going to be .NET Framework with a capital F. And so Avalonia absolutely must support that so that you don't have to do any specific migration to bring it across. So, yeah.
Excellent. Because I know that the modern .NET stuff, .NET Core, .NET 5, .NET 6, different versions of them added support for the different like WinUI and WinForms and all that kind of stuff on a Windows only. But I guess the difference here that we haven't really touched on that much so far, what I'm trying to do is introduce each of these things individually to the listener, right? The thing that we haven't touched on so far is that Avalonia UI is cross-platform, right?
Yeah, that's right. So first of all, Avalonia, if you're building a Windows-only application, Avalonia is still great. It's a really good option for modernizing an existing WPF application. Just because Avalonia is primarily cross-platform doesn't mean you should still have a look at it and see if it meets your needs. It may be a good option for you, even if it's Windows only. However, Avalonia, the problem that it was first created for was to solve the cross-platform UI framework problem. And when we started, there was not really many options in this space. If you were primarily a mobile application, you had Xamarin, which is a great platform. If you needed a cross-platform desktop application, it was really difficult at that time, 8 years ago, to find anything. You would have to go to more native toolkits, things like that. Avalonia, it's cross-platform, and there's various different types of cross-platform UI frameworks. So it's almost like there's a spectrum of different types, and depending on what your application is and the types of users that you have, you would decide to pick different frameworks. And the place where Avalonia fits in is I always call it a lookless framework. There's no actual default theme or look and feel. It does come with one out the box, but it's completely customizable. So Avalonia renders all its own controls. You can make them look or style them however you want. And this is really great for a lot of modern apps. If you take like Slack, for example, Slack, I think most people use the app or have used it and are familiar with it. That application looks the same on Linux, on Mac, on Windows, and that's a very popular option for many types of applications. For some people, that won't be what they want. They will want a native UI, and so they'll want a Mac OS looking button when it's running on Mac, and they'll want a Windows looking button when it's on Windows. And that's great. It depends on your needs. Avalonia fits more of that type of application where you want the same look, exactly the same on all platforms. And a good example of this is we've worked with a company that have a very popular source control tool. And they have a team that's divided into 3 parts. So they've got a few developers that work just on the Linux version or the Linux part of the UI. Then they've got a few developers that work just on the Mac version. They've got a few developers that work just on the Windows version. Now, whenever they had to add a new feature, they got to get all the 3 teams to implement that feature. They may have a problem on the Linux version or the Mac version, which means that now they've got to go back to the drawing board and then change that. So it's very, very, unless you've got many, many, many developers, it can be kind of counterproductive to build your app in that way. For some people, that will be the way forward, but for others, this is where Avalonia can really save time. So this particular team that I'm talking about, they've adopted Avalonia. They've gradually ported their application piece by piece to Avalonia, and now the whole team all works together, and they just implement the feature once. So I was speaking with them the other day, and they were saying, "Hey, we've had these features that we wanted to implement on the backlog for several years now, and we haven't been able to do it because it would take too long, and we've started on that now." So they're able to move forward. And that's really the power of Avalonia. That's what it can do for you.
You see, that I love that. Giving the developers and the designers the ability to work almost at the speed of thought, right? Because that's what you want, right? It's not quite the speed of thought, but I always go back to when I was playing around with WinForms back in 2006, and it was a case of drag a button, double click the button, and all of the wiring up of setting up events and all that kind of stuff is done for you, right? And I love that. I'm wary of using the word productivity, right? Because my worry is that people go, oh, productivity, that's like Kanban and all these, all these Agile and Scrum and all the other buzzword bingo. But it's actually getting stuff done, right? I'm not sure whether Avalonia UI is a drag and drop sort of thing, but I feel like it would be if it's based along the ideas of WPF. But like just being able to just really quickly get a bunch of people together and say, right, okay, this is the new framework. Once you've all learnt it, it doesn't matter where you're running, it just works and it looks the same. And that I absolutely love that, because like I say, it feels like you're handing back the power to work at the speed of thought or the speed of creativity, right?
Yeah, sure. If you have to, every feature you want to implement, if you've got to think of 3 different UI concepts, and it's 3 times the amount of thinking that you've got to do, 3 times the amount of designing that you've got to do, 3 times the amount of testing, and then the maintenance. So, it just kind of grows exponentially. And then, a couple of years down the line, you might want to support mobile. So now you've added an extra team on there. So, yeah. And Avalonia it started off as desktop. So it's kind of, if you've got like a high fidelity content creating app, maybe like, something like, you want to do a 2D drawing app, that there's a team that have made this program called Lunacy. It's like icons8.com/Lunacy. And it's a tool a bit like Figma. It's for doing like 2D designs. It's got all these like toolboxes all around that, like a canvas, and you can zoom in and out. And they've built that on Avalonia. It's super fast. If your application needs to do like any kind of working with text editing or code editing, that's what I mean by like high fidelity. It needs a lot of controls. It needs to look great, but it needs a lot of controls. It needs to give the user a lot of control. Avalonia is, in my opinion, the best solution right now in the open source .NET UI space for that kind of application. And although Avalonia, we do have support for mobile backends, they're kind of at the beta stage. If you're a mobile first application, you might consider Xamarin. That's going to cover you more right now. And we do have people that share code between Xamarin and Avalonia. So we like to work together with all the frameworks, like we coexist in harmony with most of the others. And although we are hoping to improve our mobile targets to get them production ready. I mean, some people are actually using iOS, iPad, and phone with Avalonia in production right now. We're hoping to improve that later. So, if you take Xamarin and Maui, they come from a mobile framework, and now they're adding on to try and get that to desktop. And I think for some applications, that's going to work great. If you are primarily a mobile application, your application may be it may not be one of those high fidelity content creation apps, so that's going to suit you fine. But if you are one of those kind of desktop first applications, and you might need a mobile companion, I think Avalonia then becomes a very viable option to consider.
So there's a couple of things that I want to sort of circle back to and sort of expand upon that you've mentioned there, and that's it's working on the desktops. And I'll use a plural there because we've got Windows, we've got Mac, and this is the easiest one to say, the Linux, right? As a Linux on the desktop user, I know that there isn't, like on Windows, you draw a window by saying, Windows, draw me a window, and Windows takes care of it all. On Mac OS, you say, hey, Mac OS, draw me a window, and it takes care of it. on Linux, there's like 12 different layers between you as the developer and a window being used. That's me overemphasizing a whole bunch of stuff. But imagine it's like two or three layers, right? You've got a Windows server, which just talks to the different hardware and says, take this input and send it over here as a message to that window. And then you've got a desktop environment, and then maybe you've got a compositor, and then maybe you've got like the theme of the UI that's being used on that. So actually just drawing a window, and hopefully you can hear the bunny quotes there, is not that easy on a Linux system because there isn't a Linux system, right? Unless you're going with a server-side stuff. But even then, Linux itself, being the kernel, is kind of useless by itself, right? It requires all the cruft around it to actually make it work. And so I just want to take a moment and actually, if you can share any knowledge on this, like the fact that it runs on the Linuxes is a huge achievement to me, regardless of whether it's WPF or not, or regardless of whether it uses XAML or not, regardless of whether it uses .NET or not. Making something that is cross-platform across many different Linux desktop environments and all those different bits that can swap out, I think is a huge achievement, and something that I suppose most Windows and Mac users, which I again, and something I suppose that most Windows and Mac users won't really appreciate too well. Like off the top of my head, I can think of there's GNOME, there's KDE, there's XFCE, and then there's a bunch of offshoots. And then you've got whether it uses X or whether it uses Wayland and all the other things, right? And so just having that one thing that shows a window on all of those different, and you can swap them out as well, right? I've got a Pop OS machine which runs on a Cosmic, which is System 76's own window manager or desktop environment. It used to use GNOME, and I can literally, when I'm logged in, I can say install XFCE, and then reboot, and it's running XFCE, right? But then presumably Avalonia UI just still works with all of that cruft underneath it swapped over, right?
Yeah, so we've had a very long experience with Linux and Story, and it's over the 8 years that Avalonia's been in development, we have pretty much tried almost certainly all the major Linux distributions that you can think of. And then obviously the community is so big that everybody's tried pretty much absolutely everything. And whenever there's been a problem, we've never failed to get it to run on any Linux distribution. And we've learned the pitfalls and mistakes that you can make doing that over the years. I think I'll be confident to say that Avalonia is probably the most Linux compatible UI framework right now. We can support Linux with absolutely no desktop environment, just running in a frame buffer. In fact, it's really easy to set up. I tried it the other day, and it doesn't take long. There's some instructions on our GitHub somewhere that tell you. Actually, there's some instructions on the documentation that you can find to do that. But it will run inside the frame buffer with GPU acceleration or not GPU accelerated, depending on if it's available. So, like, those Raspberry Pis. It runs really great on those if you're into that kind of thing. And then on all of the other major desktops, and Avalonia gives you an API that says, give me a window. You can be assured that if we've put an API in Avalonia, like give me a window, then it will do that on all platforms that you run that support Windows. You're not going to set a property or try an API and then have one of your customers run it at runtime and it go, oh, not supported exception. And then your customer goes, hey, this bit doesn't work. Oh yeah, that's because that feature isn't compatible. No, our APIs are cross-platform. So sometimes people from the community will say, oh, hey, we're really interested in a feature to do this. And we'll go, okay, let us think about how this would work on any platform, because obviously Linux works in a different way to Mac and Windows, and then you might want to consider, should that API work on mobile or Linux? And that's what we've become very good at doing over the years, is how you make an API that's cross-platform. And it's one of the reasons that we've chosen to kind of diverge from WPF. So we're not like 100%. We're very close to WPF. If you had WPF experience, you'd be very, very familiar. It's not going to take you any time to start using Avalonia. But where we've changed our APIs or made them different, it's usually to resolve that cross-platform story. It's not, you can't put an API that's designed for Windows and make it work on Linux. Well, you can, but it's kind of like trying to fit the square peg in the round hole, that kind of thing. So we designed all the APIs from the beginning, thinking about all the platforms. Sometimes that takes us a bit longer, but it's definitely worth it in the end. That's the reason why I believe I can confidently say that we are the most Linux compatible framework. And if you do try Avalonia and run it on whichever distribution you have, and you have problems, let me know. And we will make sure we resolve that very, very quickly.
See, I think that's one of the potential issues, I think, that the .NET MAUI team are going to have, right? So my understanding, and this is based on public knowledge, right? My understanding is that .NET MAUI is it's going to be Xamarin Forms 2.0, right? And my understanding is that for now, and this is information from, I'll say it, we're recording this on Feb 2nd, 2022, right? And so this is information that I have up to this point that is public information. My understanding is that it's going to target Windows and Mac and Android and iOS because it uses Xamarin Forms, right? And those are platforms that are supported by Xamarin Forms. And that there's going to be would you like Linux support? And if there's enough yeses, then they'll start engineering it so that then there are cross-platform interfaces that individuals can come in and say, oh, cool, I know how to draw a button on GTK, which is what GNOME uses. So I will add the code to draw a button that for the class which implements the interface, I draw a button or whatever, right? For .NET MAUI. And I feel like that's going to be a problem that the Microsoft engineers hit, in that, like you said, Windows is different to Mac, is different to Android, is different to iOS, is different to all of the Linuxes. And so I feel like perhaps they're going to have to, and this is conjecture, my own opinion, I'm not a Microsoft employee, you're not a Microsoft employee. My feeling is that they're going to have to maybe rethink that going forward to adopt a style similar to yourselves, where it's like, how would we how would this API work if it's on a Windows, if it's on a Mac, if it's on a GNOME, if it's on an XFCE, if it's on an Android, and then figure out, like you say, the best way to present that API to the developer and say, you want a button, just call this method and we'll take care of it for you. So you don't have to pass in. Because I still remember playing around with I think it was just prior to WinForms. There was like when you wanted a window on Windows, you had to say, give me a handle, like a W handle, and pass in 0000007, 00025, 00 true. And no one seemed to know what all of the nulls were for. But you needed to do that to be able to get a window, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, deep in the code of Avalonia, we're having to work with those old Win32 APIs, and that's kind of got an interesting backstory there. There's programs that were written in like the 80s on those APIs that technically you can still compile them and run. But yeah, we've had to kind of work around all those like intricacies of the framework. There's weird things that can happen, like, oh, if you set this flag with this flag, something can go totally wrong. And, we've had to work through all of that. But yeah, you don't have to worry about that kind of stuff anymore. Yeah, so on to what you were saying about the like Maui that's up and coming. Avalonia is at a very mature level, and it supports Linux. In fact, there's like a small spin-off company from Avalonia that they actually give professional support for Linux if you so needed. And the core team and the community is fully behind supporting that. So Linux is like fundamental out of the box. It's like our priority platform. And we've proven that we can support those platforms. In fact, for over a year now, we've maintained a stable API. We actually have continuous integration tools that actually enforce the API. If somebody opens a pull request and it breaks one of the APIs, it fails and it can't be merged. So we've ensured that, we've proven that we can maintain a stable API and that our API works cross-platform.
So you've mentioned so far that you can do all of these desktop applications. You have mentioned that there are real world applications out there that run using Avalonia UI. Now, I know from a previous discussion I've had with someone on the show that the application .purple runs with Avalonia UI. There was a discussion when we were talking about it, about migrating over to Avalonia UI, and so the person behind it, Michael Babienko, had said, "Hey, you should talk to these people because there's this UI framework that is amazing that you should talk about." And he was so excited because his, quite literally, Windows, Linux, and Mac desktop app was running with that. Now, I don't know whether it's still running Avalonia UI. I hope so, but there you go. But there are a couple of others, like you'd mentioned there is an application, and I'm pretty sure it's Plastic SCM. But what I'm getting at is that there are a bunch of really big applications that run it, right? And it's not just like, there's nothing wrong with just having a desktop application that just is someone's pet project. But what I mean is it's really large projects, right? And I believe, and this may be old information, and it's definitely old information by the time people listen to it, but there's something about JetBrains are using it too. Is that still the case?
Yeah, it is. So yeah, Avalonia is, if you look at our website, you'll see we've got like the company logos of people that have adopted Avalonia for major applications. I'll talk about the ones that have made public announcements so that I know that I'm safe to talk. So yeah, there's Plastic SCM, which I was probably hinting at early on. This is like a real major big application that they've ported to Avalonia, and believe me, they've tried all the different options before selecting Avalonia. And the fact that they've actually recently released, I think they've got like a beta testing release out now. But if you look on their Twitter, they have posted screenshots of their application, and if you look on our website, we've actually got their application up there. You can see, these are really big, complicated code bases that have been brought over to Avalonia. And on JetBrains, so JetBrains have some tools, .trace, .memory. These are the ones that I know of, but they may have others. And those tools are developer tools for .NET developers. They are really, really good tools. If you've ever got a memory leak or something like that, it's really easy to help you find memory leaks and debugging tools. And because they obviously, once .NET Core became a thing and .NET was going cross-platform and open source, their tools now need to have UIs cross-platform. And I know that the current release of .memory and .trace has Avalonia UI in there. I haven't heard anything yet if they're fully cross-platform yet. Maybe that's announcement may be coming soon. But because JetBrains actually started adopting Avalonia for their own tools, they wanted to have the very best developer experience for Avalonia for their own developers. And obviously they have the Rider IDE. It's not free, but if you do run an open source project or you're a student, they do give you free licenses. They're really good at that. I think you just email them and they pretty much sort it out within a day. And if you're like an independent developer, it's not so expensive. And the quality of the Rider IDE, which actually runs Linux, Mac, Windows, is superb. It is my go-to IDE. I still use Visual Studio. I still love Visual Studio. But for developing Avalonia applications, the integration that they have done there is incredible. You can actually do like refactoring inside the XAML. It's got a live previewer that it just works better than than anywhere. So yeah, they've upgraded their tools to make Avalonia work the best it could work in an IDE, primarily for their own reasons, because they've adopted it. But yeah, there's other applications that you can see there on our website. There's one called Wasabi Wallet, which is like a Bitcoin wallet, and they've got a really nice modern UI. There's a screenshot on our website. We've got the Lunacy, which is a very impressive 2D design application. I'm aware of other people that are developing like CAD applications where you've got 3D integrated in the middle of the screen, and then all the 2D menus and buttons and tools to work with CAD around the edge. And then even people are using Avalonia in like ways that, they have a plugin that goes in an existing CAD tool, but they've rendered like their plugin in Avalonia. But there's many big companies that you can see from our website, like JetBrains, like the Plastic SCM. There's like big industrial partners that are developing and using Avalonia on very, very low powered, like embedded systems that go in kind of industrial environments, like, I don't know, maybe nuclear power plants or something like that. But because they've got involved, they need Avalonia to work on those tiny systems. That means that they've actually put resources into Avalonia to optimize it, to make it still perform well on these, with, processors that are very, very limited, and the RAM is limited, that make the Raspberry Pi look like a supercomputer, basically. So they can get Avalonia to run more simple UIs, but on those with like touchscreens and that kind of thing. So yeah, like Avalonia is proven, and you can see that because it has been chosen by those kind of major people. To give you an idea as well of the size of our community, our documentation, I checked today, and by the time the podcast goes out, it will undoubtedly be more, because every month this number is just going up and up and up. But this month it's 180,000 visits to the documentation, which is kind of an indication of people who are actually using Avalonia. So, and it's growing all the time. Yeah.
That's great. That's amazing to me. Just like because how do I put it? So unintentional ignorance, right? Before last year, I hadn't heard of Avalonia UI, but then I'm not working in the cross-platform desktop UI space, so that's why I likely haven't heard of it, because I'm, most of my stuff is microservices and web-based. I just get a couple more hits on the SEO keyword thing, right? You said blockchain, I said microservices, we're good, right? But But the fact that that after these 8 years of development, you're starting to speed up and ramp up really quickly with big people, big names coming in, but also obviously smaller projects coming in. And I'm not trying to compare the size of a project, but just like the ability to run, like you said, either on incredibly constrained hardware that, like you say, is maybe a microcontroller and a couple hundred megabytes of RAM, I'm just guessing, right? All the way up to something that's running on the desktop. So we've actually talked to Plastic SCM in the past, and just the work that they're doing, because it's a source control management system, right? The work that they're doing to display all of that is just mad, right? And the fact that you can do that in Avalonia UI, I guess effectively for free across all the different desktops is an amazing achievement, I think. And then you add to that, I mean, you'd said to me when we did, so inside of baseball, we do a discovery call, have a bit of a chat about the technology beforehand. You'd said to me how there is very, 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 and I emphasize that one more time, very experimental behavior for putting your app inside of the browser as well. So like this constant innovation, it's amazing stuff.
Yeah, so with targeting the browser and WebAssembly, we actually held off from diving into there immediately. We've kept an eye on what's been happening in that space. We wanted to wait for WebAssembly, .NET on WebAssembly to mature a little bit. And we feel now that with the release of .NET 6 that has happened. It's still not perfect, but what that has enabled us to do is very recently is add a support for Avalonia apps in the web browser. And I'm not going to say it's production ready, because at Avalonia, we are very, very, very careful to say if something's production ready. We want you to use Avalonia and your first experience to be like, hey, this just works and it works really well. We don't want to we actually don't do any marketing. Everything's pretty much word of mouth, but we don't want to over market something that's not ready, because that's just going to leave a bad impression. And then, you'll tell other people, hey, it just didn't work. And then you wouldn't consider us even for desktop. So we have launched, there's a Avalonia.web package that you can use, and we've got .NET templates that you can just get. And if you're comfortable with something that might be rough around the edges, a lot of people in the community are so excited about it. They've already started building applications to run in the browser using Avalonia. We've got a few demos which I'll share links with you to put in the description or something, and you can actually just run it in the browser today, and it looks really, really good. It's only down to only a few megabytes download, and okay, it's WebAssembly. The performance is always going to be less than running natively on the desktop, but in my opinion, for the kind of applications that you need to do right now, it's a pretty good level, and well, we hope it's going to get better going forward. And yeah, so it's kind of an exciting time. It's not ready for production yet, but if you like experimenting with that, some of the people that are already contributing fixes and the bits where it's rough around the edges, they're helping to get it ready. And any of your listeners can very welcome to come and help us out and join in.
So that's the interesting thing for me, right? Like I said earlier on, I'm not in the desktop UI space anymore. But I feel like the majority of the .NET developers that I know do web-based stuff. And so a lot of when .NET Core was first released, there was a big push to just do web. It's easier. Just do web. Wrap everything up in Electron and do it that way, right? Because that was seen as an easier way to do it, right? So a lot of the people that I know in the .NET development space will be coming at desktop UI from a web perspective. And so that nice little switch around of actually, no, you need to do it on desktop will be kind of maybe a little jarring to them, because desktop development is a little different to web development, because first of all, you still have that separation. You still want the back and forward separation, the back end of the front end, the server and the client. But the difference will be that instead of saying, send this information over the web and wait for the response, it's more a case of fire up a delegate or some kind of thread and go do it and wait for the response, right? So the implementation details are slightly different, but the ideas are still the same. But then I like that you're at this position where you're able to go, hey, why don't we make this very experimental thing where we can actually use the web paradigm and see whether we can do it that way. I like that, because it's like you maybe you've identified that there is a position in the space to say, hey, let's allow these other developers into our ecosystem and show them how cool it is, right? So I just wanted to say that, because I think it's a really cool thing that you've done there.
Yeah, and one thing is that's kind of really surprised me with adding the support for WebAssembly is that when I first did it, I just thought I was adding just another platform to Avalonia, but it's kind of strange, like the possibilities that it's opened up. It's like every day I'm finding like a new way that it can be used. So there's a guy called Vslav in our community who's very active, and he's always building like really great tools. Like he's got some, I think Core 2D is one of his projects. It's like a 2D drawing project. And the other day he just said, oh, hey, how about this WebAssembly demo that he'd done? And it's like you've got Avalonia Edit on the left, which is like a full featured syntax highlighted code editor with XAML there. And then on the right, it's the Avalonia UI that the XAML produces. In the browser, you can just change the XAML in the browser, so you can just play with Avalonia now in the browser. And it's like I didn't even think that was going to happen. And then I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were like, "Hey, there's loads of like tools that we could just have on the website or on GitHub that actually run on WebAssembly, like." All the resources that show you what all the colors are, and you could search through them and stuff. And it's like, oh yeah. And icons. Oh, we can let them search for like built-in icons or things like this. And then we can have like live demos on the website. And then like even we're starting to work with some component vendors that have like pro controls and charting and things like that. And they may have like versions for WPF, but you would have to like download the demo to try it out. And some people may do that. And then, but like now you could just have the demo right there in the website next to the marketing material, whatever. The people can try it straight away. And it's like, yeah, I wasn't even thinking that all these kind of ideas can be done when I was implementing that. I was just thought I was adding another platform, but it's like mind-boggling the scenarios that this leads to. So, yeah, I kind of got bitten by the WebAssembly bug now.
I like it because that sort of goes back to that idea. It circles back to that idea of dog fooding, right? You now, like you said there, right? You've got this application by one of the contributors who's like, here's the XAML for drawing the screen. And here's the screen, and you can, like you were saying, you can edit it in line and watch it update in almost real time.
Yeah.
You know, that gives you a chance to maybe, like you say, you can try it out, or even you could debug it, right? Let's say I'm at a computer and I don't have my IDE, I don't have any software, but I've got access to source control. I've got access to this app that's sitting on the website. I can copy paste it in and play around with it. And then I can say, right, it's not the greatest. Don't ever do this, folks. Don't ever go to GitHub and submit a commit directly from the UI. But you can say, oh, of course, I fixed this now. Copy, paste back in, submit a fix. Ta-da, done. right? You don't even have to have, you could do, I can imagine a situation where you could be sat on the train commuting into work and you're on your phone looking at the code going, why doesn't this work? I'll copy paste that into the live viewer that's on the Avalonia UI website. Oh, of course, I've missed a semicolon or I've missed a closed bracket. Copy paste that back into source control and it's fixed before you even get to work.
Yeah. And GitHub has that new code spaces. It's like when you're on GitHub, you just press the full stop button on your keyboard, and it just gives you a version of Visual Studio Code in your browser with all the code from the repo all ready to go, and you can just edit it. And the contributor that I mentioned, Vslav, that did this, he tweeted out a tweet the other day with a screenshot, and it was like his Avalonia application in GitHub code spaces and running and debugging because it's all running on WebAssembly. So it's like, it's just like crazy what's going on now.
Yeah, it really is. Okay, so here's the difficult question to answer then, right? We've talked about Avalonia's history. We've talked about what it can do, how you can do it. So, and without wanting to sound confrontational, why should I choose Avalonia, right? What's so great about Avalonia? Give me like a sales pitch, an elevator pitch for why I should choose Avalonia for my next desktop, or indeed when it's stable web application.
Sure. So first thing I'll say is that as an engineer, you should look at all the options and decide which is the best option for the project that you're working on. And if you don't look at all the options, then you might not get the best result. So keep that in mind. You should try all of them, work out what's best for you and your project or your team, and choose the best one. That's the best way to go about this. But I'll give you some reasons why Avalonia may be a good choice for you. And first and foremost is Avalonia is independent. We're a open source community. We're a very welcoming community. We welcome everyone. If you find an issue or a bug, there'll be somebody in the community that responds to you. You can get that fixed. You can get that merged. You can work with us. We'll help you out. Somebody in the community will help you out. So you get to feel part of something because of that. I think I've touched on before that we're over 8 years in the space. So that's probably the longest time that any of the current cross-platform XAML-based or .NET Core-based UI frameworks have been around. And also for over a year, we've enforced stable API. So you can depend on Avalonia's API. Again, Linux is officially supported and always will be, which is something that you might find difficult to find with other platforms. And as we mentioned before, we're a technology that you can depend on, and that's proven because you can see the big names that have selected Avalonia, and they wouldn't have done that if Avalonia hadn't done its homework and it wasn't the platform that I say it is. Don't trust me though. Have a look for yourself. All the code is there. Try it out. And there's many of the example applications. They're in some of them are in the Windows Store and the Apple Store, so they've got through certifications to get into there. The community is really exponentially growing. People are joining every day into the chat and into the discussions and into the issue. So Avalonia is we're not going anywhere. We're going to be here for you. The core team of developers, most of us have left our jobs and we work full-time on Avalonia or Avalonia-related stuff. And we've basically pretty much dedicated our working lives to Avalonia. And we're not going anywhere. So you don't need to worry about if Avalonia will still be here in 4 years' time or 5 years' time. And as I say, we've spun off a small company that allows commercial entities that are using Avalonia to get paid support or help porting their applications. And we've done that primarily to, first of all, make it viable for us to work on Avalonia full time. The focus is on the community still. The community is Avalonia. But by doing that, it means that we are able to financially support ourselves whilst fully giving the best support we can and improving and working on Avalonia all the time and bringing it up to date and adding all these exciting new platforms like WebAssembly and features and making sure that the quality will remain number one and at the top and it will be dependable. So those are many reasons I can think of that you may want to choose. But as I said again, it's not for me to tell you which platform to choose. Try them all, find out which one you like the best. If that's one of the other platforms, that's great. If it's Avalonia, get in touch with me. I'll help you out. I'll point you in the right directions, or somebody else in the community will do. Everybody's welcome.
Awesome. Okay. So I guess then, where's the best place for people to go to find out about Avalonia, right? So I'm guessing Avalonia whatever, right? Is it the website? Is it GitHub? Is there a documentation website? Is it reach out to you? What's the best place to learn about Avalonia?
Sure. If you're a developer, have a look on our GitHub, our documentation, docs.avaloniaui.net. If you run a team of developers and you're interested in Avalonia, have a look at our website, avaloniaui.net. Anyone really, if you want to come and talk to us, we've got a really active community on Telegram. It's t.me/Avalonia. And people are always welcome to answer any questions, technical or non-technical. Just pop in there. Most of us are there pretty much 24 hours anyway. So there's always about 40 or 50 people online at any one time.
Excellent stuff. Okay. So what I'll say is we've got all of those links in the documentation we used to do the episode, so don't worry.
You might want to cut that out.
No, it's fine. That's perfectly fine. Because what I was going to say was, don't worry about diving over your dashboard to grab a pen to write them down, right? But that's fine, right? So, so we've got all those in the show notes. So if you're driving around, or if you're on you're going for a run, or you're working out at the gym, or you're doing the dishes or whatever, don't worry about dashing across the room to grab your phone to go to the website. They're all in the show notes. So do check the show notes. That will be the show notes in your device and on the website as well. So they're in both places. So you don't have to go very far. It's like one hop to get to that information. Like we said earlier on, one hop to bring people together. But yeah, so what I'd like to say, Dan, as we wrap up is thank you so much for being on the show and talking about Avalonia UI. I've legitimately learned a whole bunch about how difficult it is to create cross-platform UIs and the applications which run on those cross-platform UIs. And I'm genuinely blown away by the fact that you can do desktops, mobiles, and the new, very experimental, not very stable, don't use it for production web stuff as well. So it's almost like it's one platform to rule them all, trademark. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's taken us a long time to get to this point where it needs people of various different skills, and luckily through the community, those people have all come together and made this happen. And it's a lot of work, though. It is a lot of work.
Excellent. And it's all that work is, I'm afraid of using the term coming home to roost, but you know what I mean, right? It's all paying off, right? And so, like I said, Dan, thank you ever so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, that's really great. Thanks for having me on.
No worries. That was my interview with Dan Walmsley about Avalonia UI. Be sure to check out the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave me a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .netcore.show/subscribe for ways to do that, and to reach out via our contact page. That's .netcore.show/contact. And to come back next time for more .NET goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks. The .NET Core podcast is a production of RJJ Software.